The road from Rome to Nicopolis in the year of Domitian's edict was thick with philosophers, carrying what little they could lift, their cloaks pulled close against the autumn winds off the Adriatic. Among them walked a lame freedman who had once belonged to one of Nero's secretaries, a man who limped because his master had broken his leg long ago, a man whose name the schools of Greece would remember when the emperor who exiled him was scarcely recalled at all. He arrived in that small Greek town with no library, no patron, no Roman citizenship to shield him, and within a few years his lectures had drawn so wide an audience that a later emperor of a more generous temper would send word that the philosopher should return to the capital and grace the imperial court. Epictetus did not go. The refusal itself has not survived in the form of a letter, nor in a transcribed speech, nor in any document that the archives of Rome cared to preserve. What survives is the philosophy that made the refusal inevitable. What survives is the long argument, repeated in lecture after lecture and recorded by his pupil Arrian, that the only thing in the world which is truly ours is the faculty of choice, and that no emperor, no master, no chain, no threat of exile, no promise of favor can reach inside a man and take that faculty from him unless he hands it over himself. To understand why a lame Greek freedman could decline the summons of the most powerful office on earth, we must understand the principle he had spent his life teaching. We must sit, as his students sat, on the rough benches of his school at Nicopolis, and listen. Let us listen now. The principle has a name in his Greek, and that name is Prohairesis. The translators have rendered it many ways: moral purpose, volition, the faculty of choice, the will. None of these English words quite holds what Epictetus meant by it, and for our purposes it will serve us best to keep the Greek word in mind even as we use the rougher English equivalents around it. Prohairesis is the part of you that judges, that assents, that refuses, that turns toward or turns away. It is not your body. It is not your reputation. It is not your office, your family, your station, your wealth, your standing in the eyes of the powerful. It is the inward act by which you say yes or no to the appearances that come before you. And it is, Epictetus insisted, the only thing that is truly your own. Hear him in his own words, as recorded by Arrian in the first book of the Discourses, in the old translation of George Long. Of all existing things, some are in our power, and others are not in our power. In our power are thought, impulse, will to get, and will to avoid, and in a word, everything which is our own doing. Things not in our power include the body, property, reputation, office, and in a word, everything which is not our own doing. Read it once more, slowly. The list of what is not in our power is long, and it contains nearly everything a Roman of standing would have measured his life by: property, reputation, office, the body itself, which can be chained, broken, killed. These belong, Epictetus says, to the realm of the not ours. They can be taken, they can be withheld. They were never ours to begin with, only lent. What remains? Thought, impulse, the will to pursue and the will to avoid, the inward movements of the prohairesis. These cannot be taken from us by any external force. They can only be surrendered. And here is the strange and difficult heart of the teaching. A man who has understood this is free in chains, and a man who has not understood it is enslaved upon a throne. This is not a metaphor. Epictetus means it as literally as he means anything. He had been a slave. He knew the weight of an iron collar, the breaking of a leg, the daily condition of being another man's property. He also knew, having watched the powerful at close quarters in the household of Epictetus, that the emperor's secretary trembled at every shift in his master's mood, that senators of Rome calculated their words in the presence of Domitian as carefully as any kitchen slave calculated his steps around a drunken steward. Who then was the freer man? The one whose Prohairesis assented to nothing it did not approve, or the one whose every thought bent toward the favor of a tyrant? The principle, stated plainly, is this: the freedom of the Prohairesis is absolute, because nothing external can compel it. Therefore, no external authority, however vast, can command what is truly yours. It can only command what was never yours in the first place. And the wise man, having understood this, no longer fears the loss of what is not his, nor does he chase after it as though it were. This is the teaching. Now let us see the man who taught it. He was born, by the best reckoning we have, around the year 55 of our era, in the Phrygian town of Hierapolis, in what is now Western Turkey. We know the name his mother gave him no better than we know hers. Epictetus means simply acquired, a slave name, the kind of name a household gave to a child it had purchased or bred. Of his early years in Phrygia, we know almost nothing. What we know is that by his youth, he was the property of a man named Epictetus, a freedman of Nero, who had risen to become the emperor's secretary for petitions, one of the most powerful administrative figures in the imperial household. Epictetus had been a slave himself. He understood, presumably, what it was to be owned. He owned Epictetus anyway. There is a story, repeated by several ancient sources, and we may believe it or doubt it as we choose, that Epictetus once twisted his slave's leg in some fit of anger or amusement. Epictetus, the story goes, said calmly, "You will break it." His master continued. The leg broke. Epictetus then said, "Only, I told you so." The story is too clean. It has the shape of a philosophical anecdote rather than a memory. But whether or not it happened in that precise form, we know from other sources that Epictetus was lame for the whole of his adult life, and that he attributed his lameness to his time as a slave. The body, we recall, is among the things not in our power. At some point during his service in the imperial household, Epictetus permitted his slave to attend the lectures of the Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus. This was not as strange as it may sound. Educated slaves were a kind of household ornament for the Roman elite, and a master who wished to be thought cultured might allow, even encourage, his bright property to acquire learning. What Epictetus thought he was buying with this permission, we cannot know. What he got was something else. Musonius Rufus was the leading Stoic of his generation, a Roman knight who had himself been exiled more than once, a teacher who insisted that philosophy was not for the few, but for everyone, women and slaves and farmers as much as senators. Under Musonius, the lame slave from Phrygia became something else. He became a philosopher. At some point, by means and on a date the sources do not record, he was freed. He was no longer Epictetus, the property of Epictetus. He was Epictetus, the teacher. For a time, he taught in Rome. Then, around the year 93, the Emperor Domitian, who had grown suspicious of philosophers as a class, who had executed some and exiled others, issued an edict banishing all philosophers from Italy. Domitian, like many men who hold absolute power, did not enjoy hearing that he did not possess everything he thought he possessed. The philosophers were sent away, Epictetus among them. He went to Nicopolis. The town had been founded by Augustus a little over a century earlier on the western coast of Greece to commemorate the victory at Actium. It was Roman enough to be safe, Greek enough to draw students, and far enough from Rome that the emperor need not be reminded of its existence. There, Epictetus opened a school. He lived simply in a small house with, by his own account in the Discourses, almost nothing in it. There was an iron lamp, which we know about because somebody stole it, and which he replaced with an earthen one so that thieves would have less to gain. He had no wife and no children, though late in life he is said to have adopted a child to save it from exposure and to have taken in a woman to help raise it. He was, by every measure that the senators of Rome would have used, a man of no consequence. By the measure he himself used, he was a man entirely free. Students came. Some were young Romans of good family, sent abroad to acquire Polish. The most famous of these was Arrian, who would later become a Roman governor and historian, and who took down his teacher's lectures with such fidelity that we have 8 books of them, of which 4 survive. Some students came from elsewhere in the Greek world. Some, perhaps, came hoping for a quick course in clever argument and left when they found that the teacher demanded something harder. Epictetus was not a soft instructor. He scolded. He mocked the half-committed. He told students who came expecting wisdom in a few easy lessons that they were like men who wished to be Olympic victors without enduring the training. After Domitian was assassinated in 96, the philosophers were no longer in danger of imperial displeasure. The next emperors, Nerva, and then Trajan, and then Hadrian, were of a different temper. And here we come to the matter of the summons. The historical record on this is thinner than we might wish. The biographer of philosophers, Diogenes Laertius, does not cover Epictetus. Later sources, including the Historia Augusta, which is not always to be trusted, mention that the Emperor Hadrian held Epictetus in high regard and corresponded with him, perhaps even visited him, in Nicopolis. The tradition that Epictetus declined to return to Rome, declined to enter the imperial circle, declined the favor that would have meant restoration and prestige and access. This tradition is consistent with everything we know of his temper and his teaching, even where the sources thin out. What is certain is that he stayed in Nicopolis. He stayed in his small house with its earthen lamp. He stayed at his school. He died there, sometime around the year 135, in old age, having lived the philosophy he taught for as long as he could draw breath. Now let us see how the principle actually worked in him, how it functioned, day by day, in a life that began in slavery and ended in a small Greek town, refusing emperors. The Discourses are not a treatise. They are not a polished work prepared for publication. They are the notes of a student, Arrian, who attended his teacher's lessons and wrote down what was said, attempting, he tells us in his preface, to preserve the tone and force of the spoken word. What this gives us is a record more honest than any treatise could be. We hear Epictetus losing patience. We hear him changing the subject. We hear him circling, returning, hammering the same point with a new image because the old image did not land. And the point he hammers, again and again, is the freedom of the Prohairesis. Consider this passage from the first book of the Discourses, in which he imagines a tyrant threatening a philosopher. The tyrant says, "I will chain your leg." The philosopher answers, in Long's translation, "Man, what are you saying? My leg you will chain, but my will not even Zeus himself can overpower. My leg you will chain, but my will not even Zeus himself can overpower." Read it slowly. The first half concedes everything the tyrant demands. Yes, the leg can be chained. Yes, the body is in your power. Yes, you can break it, as Epictetus once broke a leg, and the body will suffer what bodies suffer. The second half takes back everything that matters. The prohairesis, the will, the inward act of assent, is not within the tyrant's reach. It is not within Zeus's reach. The most powerful being the Greek imagination had ever conceived cannot enter and rearrange the inward act of choice. Why then should we be afraid of a man with chains? This is not a rhetorical flourish for Epictetus. It is the practical conclusion of a long argument about where power lies. The tyrant believes himself powerful because he commands armies, prisons, executioners, treasuries. He commands, that is, the realm of externals. He commands everything that is not ours. But over the realm that is ours, the inward realm of judgment and choice, he has no jurisdiction. None. He never did. He only seemed to, because we, fearing the loss of what was not ours, surrendered to him what was. Hear Epictetus again, in another lecture, on the subject of how a man should behave when summoned by the powerful. "If a tyrant threaten me at court, I say, whom is he threatening? If he says, I will put you in chains, I say, he is threatening my hands and my feet. If he says, I will behead you, I say, he is threatening my neck. If he says, I will throw you into prison, I say, he is threatening the whole of this poor body. Does he then not threaten me at all? If I feel that all these things are nothing to me, he does not threaten me at all. But if I fear any of them, it is I whom he threatens. It is I whom he threatens. That is to say, the threat lands only where the prohairesis has already, in advance, given the externals weight they do not possess in themselves. If I have understood that my neck is not me, then the threat to my neck is not a threat to me. The tyrant cannot reach me unless I extend myself outward into what is not mine and offer it to him as a hostage. Now we can begin to see what the refusal of the imperial summons would have meant. The new emperor, well-disposed and curious, offers favor. He offers perhaps restoration to Rome, position, audience, the attention of the powerful. To accept is not, in itself, evil. Epictetus was not a man who taught that one must refuse all goods. He taught that one must hold all externals lightly, must judge them rightly, must not be moved by them when they conflict with the proper exercise of prohairesis. A philosopher who returned to Rome at imperial invitation would find his lectures shaped, perhaps unconsciously, by the proximity of power. He would calculate, he would adjust, he would say, eventually, less than the truth, because the truth carried a cost. The school at Nicopolis was poorer in every external sense than a school at Rome would have been. It was also freer. The prohairesis of a man with nothing to lose, who had already lost everything once, who had been a slave and had been exiled and had been lame, was a prohairesis the emperor could not reach. There is another passage worth our slow attention. Epictetus discusses the philosopher Agrippinus, a Stoic of an earlier generation who had been condemned by Nero. When the news of his condemnation was brought to Agrippinus in the bath, He asked, in Long's translation, only this: "Is the sentence exile or death?" "Exile," the messenger said, "and my property?" "The property is not confiscated." "Well then, let us go to Aricia and dine there." He continued his bath. He went to dinner. He treated the emperor's sentence as a piece of information about externals, which had to be incorporated into the day's practical arrangements, and nothing more. The sentence had not touched him. It had only touched his location. This is the principle in action. The prohairesis of Agrippinus was not in Nero's power. Nero could move his body from Rome to Aricia. He could not move his soul. And so Agrippinus, like Epictetus after him, simply did not give the emperor what the emperor was reaching for. He gave him the body. He gave him the property, if it had been asked. He kept what was his. Epictetus's whole life in Nicopolis was a slower, longer version of Agrippinus going to dinner. The emperor in Rome is curious about the lame philosopher. Let him be curious. The emperor sends word. Let him send. The philosopher continues his lectures. He scolds his students. He fills his earthen lamp. He talks about the prohairesis. He does not go. What then is the structural lesson? What is Epictetus actually teaching us when we strip away the historical setting and look at the bones of the principle? He is teaching that the question of freedom has been asked in nearly every age in the wrong direction. We ask, how can I be free from this circumstance, this constraint, this power that bears upon me? We imagine that freedom is the absence of external pressure, the removal of the obstacles between us and what we desire. And so we work to remove the obstacles. We accumulate, we position, we seek the favor of the powerful, or we seek to become powerful ourselves so that no one will be able to constrain us. And we find, as every age has found, that the powerful are not free. The emperor in his palace is more constrained than the philosopher in his small house, because the emperor has extended himself outward into so many externals that any of them can be used against him. Take away his throne, and he is broken. Take away the philosopher's earthen lamp, and he buys another, or does without. Freedom, Epictetus is teaching, is not the absence of external pressure. It is the right relationship of the prohairesis to externals. It is the inward act of refusing to count as one's own what was never one's own to begin with. The man who has understood this is free in any circumstance. The man who has not understood it is enslaved in any circumstance. This has, I think, two consequences worth our attention. The first is that no external authority is finally what it claims to be. The emperor's power is real in its own realm. He can chain the leg. He can break the body. He can exile the philosopher to a province, but his power stops at the boundary of the prohairesis. He cannot, by any threat or any promise, compel a man to assent to what the man does not approve. He can only induce the man to surrender his own assent. And this is a different thing entirely. The tyrant who believes he commands souls commands nothing. He commands only the bodies of men who have given him their souls in advance, out of fear. The second consequence is harder. If the prohairesis is the only thing truly ours, then the only authority we can finally rebel against is ourselves. The tyrant cannot enslave us. Only we can do that by misjudging where our self lies, by extending ourselves into externals and then crying out when the externals are touched. The hard work of Stoic practice is not the resistance of external powers. It is the steady, daily withdrawal of the self from the places where it does not belong. It is the recognition, repeated each morning, that the body is not me, the reputation is not me, the office is not me, the property is not me. Only the prohairesis is me, and the prohairesis is free. This is why Epictetus could refuse, or so the tradition holds, the summons of an emperor who meant him well. The refusal was not defiance. There was no anger in it, no posture of rebellion, no statement against authority. It was simply the practical consequence of a philosophy lived all the way through. The emperor was offering externals. The philosopher had already, long ago, ceased to treat externals as his. There was, therefore, nothing to negotiate. The transaction the emperor was proposing did not, for Epictetus, exist. One must consider how rare this is. The world is full of men who declare themselves free of external authority and who, the moment authority approaches them with a gift instead of a threat, discover that they had not been free at all. They had merely been unapproached. The test of freedom is not whether you can resist a tyrant who threatens you. The test is whether you can decline a benefactor who offers you what you have always wanted. Epictetus passed this test, if the tradition is true, because the things the emperor could offer were no longer things he wanted. The school at Nicopolis was enough. The earthen lamp was enough. The prohairesis was enough, because the prohairesis was all there ever was. Let us sit for a moment before we close with the question this raises for the listener. You have, in your own life, sources of authority. Some of them are explicit: an employer, a government, a family that expects certain things of you. Some are subtler: the opinion of those whose regard you value, the image of yourself you have constructed and would not wish to lose, the standing you have achieved, the room you are admitted to, the small recognitions that have, over time, come to feel like part of who you are. Epictetus would ask you, if you sat on the bench in his small house in Nicopolis, only this: which of these is you? Which of these can be taken without taking you? Which of these is in fact the inward act of your ascent, the movement of your prohairesis, and which is an external you have mistaken for yourself? He would not answer the question for you. He would not tell you that you must refuse the world's offers, or that you must accept them, or that you must do anything in particular about your standing, or your wealth, or your position. He would only ask you to see clearly where the boundary lies. The body is not you. The reputation is not you. The favor of the powerful is not you. Only the prohairesis, only the inward act. And if you saw this clearly, even for a moment, you might find that some of the authorities under which you have been living have less hold on you than you thought. Not because they have weakened, because you had been extending yourself outward into territory that was never yours and crying out all this time when that territory was touched. The lame freedman in his small house did not go to Rome. He had nowhere he needed to go. He was already where he was free. That is the lesson. We will end as he might have ended a lecture, without conclusion, without exhortation, with the matter laid down between us as it stood between him and his students on those rough benches in Nicopolis 19 centuries ago. You will carry it from here, or you will not. The prohairesis is yours.